Thanks everyone for joining today. This webcast is going to illustrate the basic use of 3D Studio Max to visualize a variety of models. While other Autodesk products are used for authoring, Max can be used to augment your workflow by enabling smooth walkthroughs and flybys without having to learn everything about it. Here's the agenda for today. There are 4 different models being used to illustrate a multidiscipline project. We'll have a model from Autodesk Inventor, one from AutoCAD Plant 3D, one from Revit, and one from Advanced Steel. Each file comes from a different product just to show the versatility of 3ds Max. Now, in the AEC space, we hardly ever model in Max. I mean, why should we? Since we can model more efficiently in the tools that we're accustomed to and we use every day. We only need Max to visualize, so that's all we're going to use it for. Now, although there are other products from Autodesk that can be used for this, I want to show you this as another viable alternative so that you can take as much advantage of your subscription as possible. Now, I've broken up this demo into a few short clips so we can get right to it. Also, I have the scene up and running in 3ds Max in case you have any questions that weren't going live, which we'll do toward the end if needed. All right, let's go. First, we're going to import the Inventor assembly. The process is pretty straightforward. You'll only need to bring in the IAM file, the top-level assembly file, but the full assembly must be available. And here are the import settings, which are quite common. The only one you might need to change occasionally would be the vertical axis, which depends on the axis that's in the assembly. After the import is complete, you might need to move it once the rest of the files are in place. Inventor assemblies don't really have a position like a building would, so we'll move it when the time comes. Notice over here in the Scene Explorer that the assembly has been grouped. Max does a nice job of recognizing the assembly, but there are still a few items outside the group. I'm going to select those myself and then attach them to that group just to fold them underneath. This will make working with the assembly as a whole much easier. And that's all it takes to bring in an Inventor assembly. Max does all the heavy lifting for you. Next, we'll bring in the CAD files. We'll start with the Plant 3D model first. And I'm going to link this CAD file versus import. Linking does come with some presets. And you'll also have control over which layers you would like to bring in. So you only can bring in portions of a CAD file if you want. Now this file, the actual project position was accounted for while it was being modeled, which means it will land where it's supposed to in Max. Again, the file was grouped automatically. That'll make it easier to work with. Now let's bring in the file from Advanced Steel. Again, because these two were coordinated during their parts of the project, this one also lands where it's supposed to. But in Max, exact positioning may not be critical for visualization, so we can always move these if we need to. All right. Next, we'll bring in the Revit project. This will also be a link. Revit also comes with some presets that we can leverage. And we are going to look at one of those here. That way we can group things the way we want. We can also choose which view from the Revit project that we want to bring in. And for the presets, I'm going to duplicate one of these. I like to group things, doors be doors, walls with walls, and so forth. But there are a few things from the Revit project that I don't want to bring in. So I'm going to create my own preset off of an existing one. And I'm going to remove the things I don't want. For example, the daylight system and the cameras. All I really want to bring in, along with the model, are my lights. And this will cut down on the amount of data that's coming in that we won't be using here today. So here I'll just choose that preset and go ahead and attach the file. And there you go. And that also landed right where we're supposed to. It's also grouped in the Scene Explorer like the other. So I have 4 wrapped up line items in the Scene Explorer in Max. I can control the visibility just like I would with layers in an AutoCAD file or with categories in Revit. So here I've just got the roof hidden temporarily to take a look inside, make sure everything is where I would want it. Once you have all your files in place, then we can turn our eyes onto the walkthroughs. All right, one second here. We've got a little bit of a glitch on our presentation. Bear with me for one moment. May have to restart it. Okay, let's see if we get this back online here. Okay, here we go. Apologize for the delay there. Okay. So we've linked in all our models and made sure they are in position. And we've looked inside to verify that. So now we will start to work on our first walkthrough, which I'm calling a turntable or a flyby as our first example here. So I'm going to do an overhead fly around, and I'm calling it a turntable because of the shape I'm going to use here. This is easy to do from the top view. I've also hidden the building because I just want to focus on what's in the building for this one. So the first thing you'll create is a shape that will serve as the path. In this case, I'm going to use an ellipse. And I'm going to use the move tool to position it where I want. Just get it over top of the models. To change the size, I'll use the tools on the Modify panel The ellipse will be on the floor at first, so once I get the size that I want, I will need to move it up where I want the shot to be. As you can see here, it is still down on the floor, but we want this to be more of an aerial viewpoint. So what I'm going to do is make sure that that ellipse is selected, and then I'll use the slider wheel for the Z-axis down at the bottom of the screen to elevate it. You could enter an exact value there if you want, or you can use the slider arrows and do it freehand. Next, you'll create a camera. The exact placement of the camera doesn't matter here, but we do want to point the camera at a certain spot in the shot. So wherever you want that focal point to be, we will establish that. And then we'll go to the motion panel. And we're going to assign a controller. So I'm going to click on the position for the camera and then assign controller. And the controller that we want is called path constraint. That's the first step. So we will attach the path constraint to the camera. Then we'll scroll down in the modify panel and choose add path, and then select the ellipse on screen. And that will attach the camera to the ellipse. And as we start to play this back in a few moments, you'll see the camera traverse along that shape. And that's how we know that the camera is following your path. Now that's from a top view. Let's take a look at it from the camera view. We'll click play again and see what we have so far. It's a bit close to the models, and it's a bit too fast. So next we'll work on that. I'm going to switch back to the top view here. I'm also going to go over to the layout viewport tools on the left side of the screen and give myself a split screen. That way I can look at the path from the top view and I can see the camera view in the other viewport. This will help make some more adjustments to that camera position. So now I can modify the ellipse. I can change its Z value like I did originally. And as I do that, you can see the reaction in the camera viewport. I'm just going to raise it up. That way we can have a better view at all those models. So that looks okay, but it's still a bit fast. So that's what we'll do next, is work on the speed. To do that, I'll go to the time configuration, which is just below the playback tools, and I'm changing the end time from 100 to 300. I have this at 30 frames per second, so 100 frames would be 3 seconds, which is really short. 300 frames will give you 10 seconds. The more frames you add, the longer your shot would be, but it'll also be a lot smoother. Now, when I change that end time, notice that the camera stops moving too soon. It's still stopping at frame 100. So I'm going to select the camera and then look on the timeline around frame 100. You'll see a key. It's a little black and white rectangle. And you can drag that key over to frame 300. And then that will stretch that back out so it traverses the entire timeline. And if you want to make this even smoother, you can add more frames. So if 300 frames is still too short for you, try 600 or increment from there. I go with 300, 600, 900 because every time you do that, it adds 10 seconds to your overall timeline. So right now we're set at a 600 frame timeline, which will total 20 seconds of walkthrough. And at 600, it starts to look like it's cruising around versus flying really fast around the perimeter of your models. I'm also going to drag that last key off of frame 600. That way it'll give the impression that there's a pause at the end. So the movement will stop before the video stops, for example. All right. Now we're going to do a walkthrough. This one's going to be inside the building. I want to unhide the building. And to add the next path, though, I'll need to hide the roof from the top. So I'm going to bring the building back, and then I'll just hide the roof. And just for clarity, I'm also going to hide the ellipse with its camera as well as the lights. Okay, back to the Shapes panel. I'm going to create a line. And the nice thing about the line command in Max is that when you click and hold on each point, it creates a curve at that point, which means it will behave like a spline. And I'll get a nice curve when I'm finished. And this path can have as many or as few points as you see fit. It's also a great way to plan your walkthrough. So if you don't like the way it looks as you're creating it, you can always delete it and create a new one or make changes to it. To make adjustments to it, I'm going to go to the Modify panel again. I'm going to give it a name. Max does let you name all the objects that are in the scene. And then in the modifier list, expand on line and choose vertex. This will activate the points that you picked when you created that line. And now I can make changes to each of those points, adjust their curvature, since they do have tangent controls on them, as well as the gizmo to move that point to a new location. This is what we call sub-object selection in Max. So we're inside the line, so the only thing we can do at the moment is work on those vertices. We can't select other objects that are outside of the line. In order to deactivate this, you do have to go back to the Modify panel and click on the line, and then that will release it and you can select other objects. Here we're going to set the elevation for that path and set it to around average eye level. All right, now we're ready for the next camera. Again, we'll choose a focal point for this camera. The camera can be anywhere. Just make sure the focal point goes where you want to pay attention to. Now this time, to attach it to the path, I'm going to do it a different way. Let's go ahead and name it here. Now I'm going to go to the animation menu and choose Walkthrough Assistant. This is another way to assign the camera. It's already selected here. We'll just go to Pick Path. And then select the path. And that's it. It seems to be a few less clicks than the first method. But I wanted to show you an alternative method for that. Once this is attached and you click on the playback tools, the camera will follow that path just like it did for the ellipse. And the lens will still be focused on the target point that you pick. All right, here it is from the camera's viewpoint. And since we added some curvature to that line, making turns and changing direction are very smooth. We don't want it to bounce from one location to the next. The next thing we're going to do is change the last couple of points. We're going to give the camera a little more behavior here. This is not bad, but I think we can do better. So I'm going to switch to all 4 viewports here with my viewport layout. And I'm just going to elevate the last couple of points on that path. So I'm going to go back into vertex mode. Go back to the modify panel. And then vertex. And then I'm going to select those last 3 vertices and raise them up. I'm going to do this so that towards the end of the walkthrough, the camera will float up while still looking down on that work cell. And it's real easy to set this up when you're using a multiple viewport layout. This is a very common screen layout that we use when we're working in Max. Makes it very easy to make changes and still be able to see what we want to see. So right about here, you'll see the camera raise up in elevation, but its eye is still trained on that Inventor assembly. All right, so that walkthrough is done. There is one more thing we can do to make it a little bit better. If you look closely at the end of the walkthrough, you'll see that it comes to an abrupt stop. I'd like it to slow down and then stop. To do this, we're going to use another tool to help smooth out the start and the end of the walkthrough. Now, to get a real good look at how it is stopping, we'll pull that last key back so the movement ends before the end of the timeline, and you'll be able to really see that it's moving, and then all of a sudden it's not moving. It's a very distinct stop, not very realistic. And that's what we're going to change next. The tool we're going to use to do that is called the Curve Editor. This can be a very confusing tool for us because we don't use it very often. No worries though. We only need to apply one setting and then we can get out. So the curve editor is at the beginning of the timeline. We're just going to scroll down the list until we see the camera object. Right click on percent, assign controller, and apply the Bezier float. Click OK and then close the curve editor. That's it. We don't need to know what a Bezier float is. We just need to know that when we apply it, it allows for smooth acceleration and deceleration at the beginning and the end of a walkthrough. So you'll see how it slows and comes to a nice soft end of that. That's what the Bezier float does. Okay, that does it for the walkthroughs. For some more fine tuning, let's take a look at the materials. This will just be an overview. I'll focus on the 3 blue tanks that were in the Plant 3D file. I'm also going to focus on the floor and the walls. I'm not really concerned with the current materials. I just want to add new ones. To open the material editor, you'll press M on the keyboard. I'm going to use a physical material here, so I'll drag one onto the canvas here in the material editor. We'll give it a name. And then I'm going to use one of the presets. It's a nice thing about the physical material in 3ds Max. We can use a preset and let Max do the heavy lifting. Once you have your material created, then we will assign it to objects that we select in the model. So I'm going to select the floor and the walls. And then I'll go back into the material canvas and right-click on the material and then assign material to selection. And you'll see that change reflected in the model as soon as you do that. So you can override any material that might come in from the source model. Now I'm going to clear the canvas and create another physical material. This one's going to be for aluminum. And then we'll assign it to those blue tanks. Now I have to select a few more objects that make up the tanks. And once I have those selected, then we'll go back to the material and assign it. And once you play this back from the camera views and play your walkthrough, you'll start to see the new materials with more realism. This is as far as we'll go with materials for today. However, they are covered in more depth in our other webcasts. Okay, that's it. Let's review what we've done so far. First, we brought in an Inventor assembly, the AutoCAD files, and a Revit file. Next, we moved what we needed to. After that, we created the paths, and then we added the cameras and associated them to each path. And then finally, we created the walkthrough and the flyby. As I said before, those of us in AEC don't work in Max all day long. We're not modeling and creating in Max. We're usually doing that in Revit or AutoCAD or one of the specialized tool sets or Inventor. So it's important that we only focus on the tools we need to get this task done. So the tools you saw today were those tools. Very small number of things to pay attention to in Max, which is very helpful. Now for some tips. First, when you're dealing with larger files, no matter where they're coming from, be sure to purge those as much as possible before bringing them into Max. This will minimize the import times. Next, use groups whenever you can. Although Max creates groups for imported and linked files, you can still create your own or rearrange those however you need to help you keep things organized. All of the authoring tools that we use every day, they're capable of adding materials, and they transfer to Max just fine. The Autodesk products all rely on the same material libraries. However, it's not necessary to add them in the source models. In Revit, sure, materials are a big part of Revit, but in tools like Plant 3D and Advanced Steel, the focus is not on the materials in those products. So it's best to ignore them until you get into Max, and then use the material editor in Max to apply those. I do recommend setting up paths first. This helps to plan what you want the cameras to do. When you have a well-planned path, working with the cameras becomes much easier. Lastly, be sure to add the Bezier float controller to the curve, or using the curve editor to those paths that have a start point and an end point. The result will be an easier setup, much smoother walkthrough that you might get from the other products. Here are our resources that you can take advantage of for self-help. On our YouTube page, you'll find the recordings for all our previous webcasts. This one will be available shortly after this one. Plus, we have plenty of articles on our blog and hagerman.com, so be sure to check those out. And we have even more content on our Customer Hub. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today.